Let's get some analysis now from our expert panel. Karim Sadjadpour specializes in Iran for the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Meghan O'Sullivan, professor at Harvard's Kennedy School, who served as director for Iraq and Afghanistan on the National Security Council of George W. Bush. And retired Admiral James Stavridis, who served as Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. He's also the author of Sailing True North. And Admiral Stavridis, let me begin with you. You heard Secretary Pompeo there say that America is safer today, the world is safer today. Do you agree with that? And what should the American military be braced for right now?
I think tactically it's correct to say that the world is safer because Soleimani is dead. That's a tactical function. I think strategically, however, we are entering a period in which almost certainly, George, we're going to see a continuing ladder of escalation. So tactically, we're safer for taking that particular chess piece off the board. I really don't see where our strategy in that chess match is going to take us other than into increasing levels of violence, unfortunately. So what should the U.S. military be prepared for? I would start by saying worry about what's at sea. Worry about our ships in the Arabian Gulf. The Iranians have diesel submarines. They have cruise missiles. They can use mines. That is a potential strike point. Secondly, the use of proxy forces around the region against U.S. forces from Afghanistan all the way to the shores of the Mediterranean Sea. And I think thirdly, George, I'd draw a line under cyber. I think that the Iranians have significant capability here. They can use it to degrade our military command and control, but they can also go after domestic targets. Lastly, we ought to be very concerned about what the Iranians will say is a proportional action, which would be to take out a U.S. diplomat, a senior U.S. military officer, and not just one in the region. We have many, many, for example, in Europe, which would be much softer targets than what is in the Middle East.
A range of options.
Buckle up, a big range of options.
Yeah, big range of options there. But Meghan O'Sullivan, we did also hear the Secretary say, make the opposite calculation of both Presidents Obama and President Bush, who you served with. He says the risk of inaction against Soleimani were greater.
I think it really depends on the assessments of the pros and cons, and the Bush and Obama administrations clearly weighed that the cons outweighed the risks here. And the Trump administration, in making this opposite assessment, we have to wonder, did they not fully assess all the risks or all the ways in which U.S. power and our ability to achieve goals would be jeopardized? Or did they overstate the benefits? Clearly, there are huge counterterrorism benefits, as Admiral Stavridis mentioned. But at the same time, I'm concerned that they may have assessed the Iranian regime to be very weak, and to think that this could actually catalyze something greater inside the regime. They're looking at a period where Iran had been experiencing widespread protest, is under a lot of economic stress, and maybe they made an assessment that the benefits of doing something so dramatic and so potentially destabilizing would make this calculation more sensible than it was under President Bush and Obama.
You're a student of the Iranian regime. How much does this hurt them?
Well, Iran is a very polarized society, and I think what this does is you have a passionate minority of folks who support the regime. You have a silent majority, I would argue, who are not fans of the regime or Soleimani's worldview. This really energizes the passionate majority of regime supporters. And when you look historically at the collapse of authoritarian regimes, there's usually two key ingredients. You obviously need pressure from below, but you also need divisions at the top. And what this assassination has done is it's unified Iran's politics.
But how should we think about measuring the Iranian response? I was struck by the observation of one analyst who said, in all these eulogies for General Soleimani, the word vengeance has been matched by the word patience.
You know, what's paramount for the Iranian regime is its own survival. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, is 80 years old. He's been ruling for 30 years. He wants to die as supreme leader, and he's working within very careful parameters. On the one hand, if he doesn't respond to this assassination, he risks losing face. If he responds excessively, he risks losing his head. And so I think it's going to be a drawn-out response that's going to happen over the course of many months.
And Admiral Stavridis is maybe drawing America back into the Middle East. We know that President Trump came in promising to draw America out. Now 3,500 more troops heading towards Iraq. What does that tell you? What does this mean for the fight against ISIS?
It is going to degrade our fight against ISIS in the sense of we're going to have to put so much more military emphasis on our defensive postures, more missile defense units, George, more use of defensive cyber means, focusing our intelligence network on Iran when we ought to be using it to continue the conflict against the Islamic State. The Islamic State, by the way, is kind of like embers in a forest fire. Those could reflash. The worst part about it is if our troops are indeed forced to leave Iraq, that's where 5,000 U.S. troops are focused on ending what is left of ISIS in the physical realm. So there are real downsides to shifting the lens, if you will, over to Iran. That's a second-order consideration, but I think a significant one. And it gets back to this idea of, do we have a strategy? Have we put in place all the right moves, the international, the interagency, the private-public, our strategic narrative? We're really good at launching missiles, George. We could get better at launching ideas.
And Meghan O'Sullivan, we saw the Iraqi parliament today put off any decision on calling for the withdrawal of U.S. troops. Is that inevitable now?
I wouldn't say it's inevitable, but what I would say is inevitable is that the nature of the American presence is going to change. Certainly, it's possible that the Iraqi parliament and the Iraqi government could ask the U.S. to leave, and we'll have no choice to leave in that instance. But even if that doesn't happen, and I agree with Admiral Stavridis that we really want to avoid that because that would have big implications for the fight against ISIS and regional stability. But even if U.S. forces stay, they're going to be much more vulnerable in Iraq than they were a few weeks ago. And this is because now Iraqi forces, or Iraqi political forces, are much more ambivalent about the U.S. presence. It's important to remember that Soleimani was not viewed, as we view him, I think rightly so, as a terrorist leader. In Iraq, he was viewed by many, many people as the first person who came to Iraqis' defense when ISIS overtook large swaths of the country in 2014. He was seen as someone, by many people, not all, as a friend of Iraq. And so now we see people like Muqtada al-Sadr, just a few days ago, call out the Mahdi army, which we haven't seen in force since an Iraqi Shia militia that really posed a major challenge to the U.S. and the Iraqi government before the surge. It's for the first time since the surge in Iraq, almost 10 years ago, Muqtada al-Sadr had called on the Mahdi army to be ready to defend the country. So I think the U.S. forces, if they do find a way to stay, are going to be under major threat. Some even predict another insurgency against U.S. forces, but one that is Shia-led rather than Sunni-led as in the past.
And we've also seen even some analysts suggest the possibility of a tactical alliance between enemies, the al-Shabaab, other ISIS groups, and now Iran, because they have a common enemy, the United States.
Certainly for the Iranian regime, enemy number one has been the United States, and they've been willing to work with Sunni radical groups against the United States. I also think that Iran is going to be very motivated to make Donald Trump a one-term president. They think that the hostage crisis made Jimmy Carter a one-term president, and it's going to put Trump in a very difficult position in 2020, because either if he doesn't respond to Iranian provocations, he looks weak. If he does respond, he risks a conflict which he thinks would be bad for his base.
Great insights. Thank you all very much. Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.